Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Gently Used, Still Works, by J.B. Lynn, narrated by Coleen Marlo. Prologue. Letty wasn't a thief, Beatrice, the youngest of the three Concordia sisters, insisted, staring at a hollowed-out cookbook that contained a wad of cash. The way she was pouting, sticking out her lower lip, she looked more like a 3-year-old than a woman of 30. Nobody said she was, Amanda, the oldest of the sisters, soothed while simultaneously glaring at their middle sister for daring to upset the baby of the family. Winnie shrugged. At 35, she was unwilling to be cowed by Amanda's wrath, or swayed by Bea's unshakable faith in their recently deceased godmother. The money had to come from somewhere. We have more important things to worry about than that, Amanda snapped the book shut, pressing down on the cover like she wanted to punish it for the secret it held. Like who killed Letty? The three sisters looked from one to the other for a long moment, Amanda's declaration hanging in the air, a specter of death. Bea looked stricken, Amanda appeared determined, and Winnie felt overwhelmed. She was in the business of advertising, not investigating, and quite frankly, the constant company of her sisters was wearing her out. Not that she dared to say any of that. She chose to utter much safer words. We need to open the store. I'll put this upstairs. Amanda scowled but handed over the book. Winnie snatched it up and climbed the flight of steps to the apartment above the one-woman's junk consignment shop. The scruffy brown rescue mutt, Nutmeg, followed, practically colliding with her heels. She wished she'd never found the hidden money. She shoved the cookbook back into its camouflaged in plain sight hiding spot in the kitchen and listened as her sisters below moved about the store, preparing to welcome in the public. As a creative, Winnie chafed at the confines of working in this shop, but Bea and Amanda seemed to have a real talent for it. Bea was a whiz at understanding the value of and displaying merchandise, and Amanda had an aptitude for connecting with customers. The apartment over the shop was a long studio with a bedroom area, a kitchenette with a bistro table and 2 chairs, and a living room section that featured a desk and a sleeper sofa. Amanda, being the oldest, had laid claim to the bed, but Winnie had taken over the desk. While the space may have served their godmother well, it wasn't really big enough for the 2 oldest Concordia sisters, who'd threatened to kill each other more than once when they'd shared a room as teenagers. Winnie was glad to be in the apartment alone. She needed breathing room. Both she and Amanda were being as respectful as possible of the other's needs, but privacy was impossible to attain in a place where the only door was to the bathroom. Sinking into the chair at Letty's desk, Winnie settled in to do the kind of work she was best at in this scenario, crunching numbers. Nutmeg lay at her feet, the stray seeming to have adopted her as his human for the day. She fiddled with the amethyst bracelet Letty had bequeathed her, admiring the purple stones against her skin, as she waited for the laptop to boot up. She wondered, not for the first time, how her life had turned out like this. How had she ended up living in an apartment over a storefront, running a shop with her sisters that sold used goods in Sarasota, Florida? Fate had taken her plans for a perfect life and put them through a shredder. First, she'd lost her advertising company because she'd trusted the wrong people. Then, Letty, her godmother, the woman who'd raised Winnie and her sisters, had been taken from them. By a killer, if one was to believe Beatrice and Amanda's theory. It had been easy to discount the ramblings of sisters she didn't know that well when Beatrice had been talking about getting visions from touching objects and Amanda claimed to talk to a ghost. Winnie had thought they were both reacting badly to the shock of Letty's passing. That, combined with the unfortunate episode of all 3 of them being struck by lightning on the beach while scattering their godmother's ashes, could have explained their questionable beliefs. On top of that, Beatrice had recently been in an accident that had left her in a wheelchair for a while, and Amanda was traumatized by a recent divorce. It wasn't a stretch for Winnie to ignore her sister's crazy theory. But then Detective Tom Keller, who seemed to be a perfectly logical and sane human being, had started poking around and declared that Letty's death seemed suspicious. Suddenly there was some legitimacy to the claim that their godmother had been a victim of foul play. The shop bell jangled below, jolting Winnie out of her dark thoughts. A smile played at the corners of her mouth as she heard Piper, one of their store-owner neighbors, ask, "Why isn't Angus outside?" "Because he's too heavy to wrestle out there," was Amanda's terse reply. She couldn't make out the rest of the conversation, but she heard Bea's distinctive laugh. "Never underestimate the power of caffeine and carbs," Winnie muttered to herself. A moment later, she heard footsteps on the stairs, and then a tentative knock against the wall. She turned in the direction of the sound. "Come on up, Piper." The perky pigtails of Piper Woodruff appeared first, making it seem like the owner of the local coffee shop had antennae sticking out of her head. "Can't stay. I left a couple of muffins downstairs, but you'll have to act fast if you want to get one." As though the dog understood what she'd said, he leapt to his feet and galloped down the stairs in search of food. Chuckling at his antics, Piper handed Winnie a cup of steaming coffee and a manila envelope. "I found the contract you asked for." "Thanks," Winnie said, placing both on the desk. Piper was already disappearing back down the stairs, the ties of her apron flapping behind her. "I'll bring it back this afternoon," Winnie called after her, but Piper was already gone. She sipped the coffee and then slowly opened the envelope. She might not know how to get her own life back on track, or who had killed Letty, but she was determined to not let Peter Perkins, the owner of the strip mall where both their shops were located, evict Piper just so that he could sell it and earn a tidy profit from developers who wanted to put up condos. Winnie knew that Letty would have wanted her to help her neighbors. That was the kind of woman she was, leading by example. She'd modeled kindness and generosity like they were the noblest of callings. Letty had been the sort of woman that sacrificed her life plan to raise 3 orphaned sisters. The least Winnie could do was to uphold her legacy. And maybe help solve her murder. 1. "Besotted," Amanda declared. "Who's besotted?" Winnie asked, descending the stairs into the shop. She'd needed a break from staring at spreadsheets and invoices, and had decided to head over to Perk Up for a coffee break. Her older sister sat behind the cash register, absent-mindedly tugging at the rose quartz earrings she wore. "Ash is besotted with Bea." Beatrice was over in the houseware section, head down, jaw clenched, pretending to study an old muffin tin. She'd recently graduated from a wheelchair to crutches, and every time Winnie saw her, she looked like a feather could knock her off her feet. Taking pity on her, Winnie decided to give her a break from their older sister's proclamations by teasing Amanda. "Did your ghost tell you that?" Annoyance flashed in Amanda's eyes. "Anybody can see that he is, the way he keeps closing up his shop to take her to the physical therapy appointments." She glanced over at the bookshelf and added, "And Jess, if you must know, Rupert agrees with me." Winnie saw Bea raise her gaze in the direction of the books. She assumed that, like her, she saw nothing out of place. But unlike Winnie, Bea was convinced in the legitimacy of the ghost Amanda claimed to see. Secretly, Winnie agreed with Amanda, too. Ash Costin, the carpenter, was definitely infatuated with their younger sister, and Winnie suspected she felt the same way about him. But she and her sisters didn't have the sort of relationship where they shared that kind of thing. Instead, they were masters of avoiding and deflecting any subjects that might help them get to know each other more authentically. Before the issue could be resolved, the bell at the door jangled. The Concordia sisters all looked to see who was joining them. Greta, the shop's part-time employee, breezed in with a smile and an apology. "I can only stay for an hour. I have a meeting at the kids' school." "But we were counting on you," Amanda began to protest. "Bea has PT and I have an appointment." Winnie's curiosity spiked, wondering what kind of appointment she had. "I'm sorry," Greta said firmly, "but my deal with Letty was that the needs of my children always outrank the needs of the business." "I can reschedule," Bea offered. "It's okay," Winnie told her. "I'll cover the shop." "You?" The amount of disbelief Amanda managed to inject into a single syllable would have been impressive if it hadn't irritated Winnie so much. "Yes, me. I'm taking a coffee break and we'll be back in 40 minutes. Will that leave you enough time to get to your appointment?" Amanda nodded. Winnie grabbed her sketch pad and pencil case and hurried out the door. Nutmeg followed. "No," she told the dog firmly. "I am going to sit inside today, which means you have to wait here." She made a shooing motion at the dog, who, ears flattened, slunk back into the consignment shop. Shaking her head, Winnie walked down the strip mall sidewalk in search of a few minutes of alone time. Ash Costin was standing outside Perk Up, in deep conversation with another man who looked familiar to Winnie, but she couldn't identify. She assumed that he was either a regular at the coffee shop or he'd attended her godmother Letty's remembrance service. Not wanting to interrupt, Winnie gave a nod to Ash as she walked past. "Winnie," he called out, "have you met Bruce Gold?" Winnie shook her head, pasted on a polite smile, and extended her hand. "Pleased to meet you." Bruce, in his early 60s, grinned back. She was startled and slightly amused to see that he had 2 gold front teeth. "Bruce is the dry cleaner," Ash explained, "and Winnie is one of Letty's girls." Bruce pumped her hand and grinned wider. "Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thank you." Winnie stood there awkwardly, not knowing what else to say. "I'm kind of on a tight schedule," she said, pointing at the coffee shop. Of course, of course." Bruce released her hand. "Have a good day," Winnie said, heading into the store. She didn't make it to the door before a slight, sandy-haired man came barreling out. "Jim," Ash called, "have you met Winnie?" The man peered down at her and blinked. "I don't believe so." Winnie shored up her smile, wondering why Ash had decided to be the welcome wagon this morning when all she wanted was a moment's peace. "Winnie Concordia," she said, extending her hand. "Jim Pickney," he replied, slipping his palm against hers. She started a bit, as what felt like a spark jumped between them. Her eyes flew to his. He, too, seemed startled. Ever the friendly host, Ash filled in, "Winnie is one of Letty's girls, and Jim is the local accountant." Instinctively, Winnie glanced in the direction of Jim Pickney's storefront. Not for the first time, she wondered why he'd set up in such an eclectic strip mall-type place instead of a more sedate business park. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Jim murmured, squeezing her hand. "She was a wonderful woman." His sympathy was genuine. She could hear it both in his voice and see it in his eyes, and it caught her off guard. Tears prickled the back of her eyes. "Thank you." "Winnie's in a rush," Ash told Jim. "You should let her go." Looking down to see their hands still joined, Jim's eyes widened slightly, and he dropped her hand as though it were a hot potato. Winnie fought not to wince as a feeling of unexpected loss crept over her. "It was nice to meet you," Jim said. He held the door open for her, and she passed into the shop, shoving her hand in her pocket in hopes the feeling would disappear. Piper was behind the counter, deep in conversation with Matt, the baker, someone Winnie had not yet been introduced to. She really wasn't in the mood this morning to meet him either, so she hurried over to a table in the corner. The scent of lilies wafted toward her, and she sniffed the air, looking around for flowers but not spotting any. The cloying sweetness was an off-putting odor, considering the place usually smelled wonderful, a combination of coffee and warmed baked goods. She glanced over at the only customer, a grizzled man in worn jeans and a T-shirt spattered with paint. She doubted that he was the one giving off the aroma. Taking out her sketchbook and pencil, she began to absent-mindedly draw. A couple of minutes later, Piper strolled over and put a steaming hot cup of coffee in front of her. She glanced curiously at what Winnie had been creating. "Who's that?" Winnie shrugged, looking down at the teenage boy whose profile she'd created. "Don't know." Piper shook her head. "I wish I had that kind of ability." "It's just a way to fill time," Winnie told her. "Thank you for the coffee." Taking the hint that Winnie needed to be alone, Piper nodded and walked away. "Do you need anything else, Hank?" she asked the older man who was nibbling on a scone. "No, thanks," he said quietly. The baker walked out, scowling. Winnie was pretty certain it was his permanent expression. She wasn't sure she had ever seen him smile, which was one of the reasons why she wasn't in a hurry to meet him. She turned her attention back to her sketch, tilting her head. Piper's question was logical, and for the first time, Winnie wondered why she drew the boy. "Who are you?" she whispered. 2. Amanda had already left for her appointment when Winnie returned to One Woman's Junk. She could have sworn that the wink of the 3-foot-tall tartan-cap-wearing, ashtray-bearing dragon that held open the door was more pronounced as she sidled inside. Bea was sitting there, seemingly having a conversation with the little black sheep that she'd placed on top of the cash register. "But we'll see," she said to the toy. Winnie winced. She really wasn't much of a believer that Bea was able to talk to inanimate objects and that Amanda was able to talk to ghosts. It all made her very uncomfortable. "I'm back," she announced. Nutmeg barked once, welcoming her return. Bea looked up guiltily, as though worried her sister had eavesdropped on her conversation with Pim, the toy. "Okay, I'm going to go. You sure you can hold down the fort?" Winnie nodded. It didn't feel great that her sisters had so little faith in her, but she couldn't blame them. She'd shown no interest in the running of the shop. She was happy to work behind the scenes on the financials and things like that, but she was uncomfortable with customer interaction. Still, she knew she had to do it. If she'd been more involved with her customers in her ad agency, instead of having her partner deal with that end of things, she'd still own her business. Bea grabbed the sheep and headed out the door, her gait still a little awkward on her crutches. Winnie settled herself behind the cash register and surveyed the shop. It was full of old junk. At least, that's what she thought. There was nothing new in the store, just pre-owned, pre-loved items, as Letty liked to refer to them. She didn't understand why this was the way her godmother had chosen to spend the last couple of years of her life. After Beatrice had moved out of the house, she'd been free. The bell over the front door jingled, and Winnie looked up to see a man carrying a clipboard march in. "Inspection," he announced, like the world should stop spinning because of his arrival. Winnie blinked. Her sisters had not told her about any upcoming inspection. She thought they would have. "Excuse me?" "Fire inspection," the man said, puffing out his chest with self-importance. Winnie eyed him suspiciously. Something about him rubbed her the wrong way. Maybe it was his officious attitude, but she wasn't willing to let him just go strolling through the shop without knowing he was there on official business. The fact that Nutmeg hid behind her validated her concern. "I assume you have a card or something?" she said. "I would have thought you would need identification." The muscle in his jaw jumped, and she could tell he was gritting his teeth. "Of course." He pulled one off of the clipboard and thrust it at her. It looked legitimate enough. Not that she'd know. "What can I help you with, Mr. Richardson?" she asked, using her most professional tone. "I just told you," he said smarmily. "It's inspection time." Behind the cover of the cash register, Winnie balled her hands into fists, not liking his tone one bit. "And I asked you how I could help," she countered smoothly. Richardson glared at her, obviously unaccustomed to being challenged in any manner. "Just stay out of my way." Realizing that an adversarial relationship was not going to make matters any better, Winnie nodded her acquiescence. "The place is yours." Richardson stalked toward the back of the store, and Winnie spun in her seat so that she could watch him. She didn't think she had a way to stop him from going through things, but she certainly wasn't going to let him do it unattended. "Excuse me," a female voice called from behind her. She glanced over her shoulder and saw an older woman smiling tentatively. "Welcome to One Woman's Junk," Winnie said automatically. "How can I help you?" "I recognize you from Letty's service," the woman said. "I'm so sorry for your loss. She was such a wonderful woman." A lump rose in Winnie's throat. She certainly was. Richardson scribbled something on his clipboard as he stomped up the stairs to the living quarters above the store. Winnie desperately wanted to follow him, but she couldn't very well do that with a customer in the shop. "Was there something I could help you with?" The woman nodded. "I'm looking for mourning jewelry." "Mourning jewelry?" Winnie parroted, wondering if that meant jewelry with the sun on it. "From the Victorian era," the woman explained patiently. Winnie nodded with a tight smile, wondering what the hell Victorian suns look like. "It's made with hair." Winnie blinked. "Hair?" "Human hair, so that part of the deceased would stay with the mourner." Winnie swallowed hard, imagining how she was going to explain to her sisters that while on her watch she'd had to deal with a fire inspector and a woman who collected the hair of long-dead strangers. The woman smiled expectantly. "Sometimes Letty had them because she knew I'd collect them." Winnie managed to keep her expression neutral, wondering why anyone in the world would collect mourning jewelry. "I'm not at all familiar with the stock of the store yet," she said, "but please help yourself and look around." The woman nodded, smiled, and began to explore the perimeter of the shop. Winnie glanced at the stairs, wondering if there was a way to dash up to get a look at whatever it was Richardson was doing. She sidled toward them. "Oh," the woman called excitedly, "there is one." She held it up as though she were a prize fighter who just won a huge boxing match and this was her trophy. "That's great," Winnie said with a smile. She wondered what Bea had thought of the value of what looked like a glorified hairball coughed up by a cat. "Would you like me to ring you up?" The woman shook her head, carried it up to the cash register, put it down, and said, "No, I'm going to keep digging. You never know what treasure you'll find here." Winnie fought the urge to roll her eyes. You never know. Personally, she didn't think there was any treasure in here, unless, of course, she counted the money in the cookbook upstairs. "Go see what he's doing," she whispered to Nutmeg. As though the dog understood her, he raced up the stairs. "It's too bad none of us can talk to him," she muttered under her breath. "Sorry?" the customer called. "I didn't quite catch that." "Nothing," Winnie said easily. "I was just talking to the dog." "Letty used to talk to Angus," the woman revealed. "Angus?" Winnie asked. "You know," she said, pointing to the statue holding the door open. "Angus. Letty used to say he guarded her secrets." "Did she?" Winnie asked. Somehow she wasn't surprised. Her godmother had gotten into the habit of doing some really strange things in her later years. "You can't go wrong with a Scot in a kilt," the woman said. Winnie did not point out that the Scot in the kilt was some sort of dragon or something. After a few minutes, the woman decided she wasn't going to find any more treasure that day and paid for her blinged-out hairball. She walked out with a wave, promising to return soon. The second she was out the door, Winnie raced for the stairs, concerned that Richardson had been spending an excessive amount of time in the apartment. She ran up them and found him standing over Letty's desk. "Is there a problem, Mr. Richardson?" He glanced back at her, startled by her arrival.
"No problem up here, but the downstairs is not zoned for residential, and you've got a bed set up down there."
"It's a cot."
He sneered. "It's a place for someone to sleep."
"My sister can't climb the stairs."
"It's a code violation, a fire hazard. Plus the place is a fire trap with the rear door being bolted closed like it is."
"I'm new to the business," Winnie said. "So how do things work now?"
"I write up my report, you get a copy, and you have a set period of time to remedy the infractions before I re-inspect," Richardson replied.
It was obviously a canned response from the quick, almost rehearsed way it rolled off his tongue. Nodding her understanding, she waited, watching him as he continued to write on his clipboard, occasionally glancing over at her. Winnie had the distinct impression that they were in some kind of standoff, neither one of them willing to budge. She didn't want to leave him alone up here. Not that there was anything to find except for the hidden cash, and that wasn't a fire hazard. But she felt something off about the amount of time he was spending in the apartment. Nutmeg stood by her side. She was grateful for the reinforcement, even in canine form. Finally, realizing she wasn't going to leave him alone, he headed for the stairs. She stepped aside to let him pass, but he made a point of stepping too close to her, intentionally invading her personal space.
"I could shut you down," he said matter-of-factly.
"I thought you said it was just a couple of infractions," she said, refusing to panic at the threat.
"A lot of things are up to my discretion." He gave her a leering smile. "But if you wanted to work out some kind of personal arrangement—"
"I don't," she told him coldly. He shook his head.
"It's a shame that women like you act like you do."
He walked down the stairs before she even had a chance to formulate a reply. She considered whether it would be worthwhile to report him to his superiors, wondering how many other women he harassed under the cover of his job.
"I'll get you the report," he said, "and I'll be back."
He walked out of the store. Nutmeg let out a bark that seemed to say, "You're not welcome." Winnie bent down and patted the little dog on the head. "You didn't like him either, did you?" The dog barked once. Winnie sighed, wondering how she and her sisters were going to deal with this new problem. 3. When Richardson was gone, Winnie looked around the store and sniffed the air. "Lilies again," she muttered to herself. Nutmeg, sitting at her feet, cocked his head to the side and looked at her inquiringly. She wasn't about to launch into an explanation for the dog. The next couple of hours passed uneventfully, with just a few customers coming through. For once, Winnie felt like she had everything under control. When Bea returned, she looked exhausted from her physical therapy as she wobbled in on her crutches. "Are you okay?" Winnie asked worriedly. Bea grunted an unintelligible response. "Can I get you anything?" "A cup of tea would be nice," Bea said weakly. "I'll make some upstairs," Winnie said. She bounded up the stairs, eager to do something to help her younger sister. They didn't always get along, but she hated seeing Bea in pain. She quickly rifled through the kitchen, looking for tea. She knew Letty had to have some. She was always pushing some herbal creation or another. While she looked for it, she noticed that some things seemed to be a little off from where she remembered them being. She wondered if Richardson had gone through the kitchen, too, but she didn't see how that would have anything to do with the fire inspection.
"Is anybody here?" a female voice trilled from downstairs.
Not wanting Bea to have to deal with a customer, Winnie rushed down the stairs, shouting, "I'm here!" She stopped midway down the flight when she saw who had yelled out. Harmony Devine, a cloud of tie-dye enveloped in an almost visible cloud of lavender, patchouli, and smoke, smiled beatifically at her. Winnie's stomach dropped. Her sister seemed to have accepted the older woman, Letty's friend, but she wasn't overly fond of her. "What can I do for you, Harmony?" she asked slowly, continuing to the base of the stairs.
"It's what I can do for you," Harmony said.
She held up the biggest bunch of dried sage Winnie had ever seen.
"I'm going to smudge this place for you, clean it out."
"Not during business hours, you're not," Winnie told her testily. "And I'm not sure you're going to do it at all. That's something for my sisters and I to decide." "I don't think it would hurt to dispel the negative energy," Bea said weakly. Winnie pivoted her gaze to her younger sister, who was slumped in the velvet-covered chair near the dressing room. "But it already stinks in here," Winnie complained. "Those lilies are driving me crazy." "What lilies?" Bea asked. Winnie's forehead scrunched. "You can't smell them?" Beatrice shook her head.
"I don't smell anything either," Harmony said, "except, of course, for your beloved Letty's orange and cinnamon."
"Well, then we should leave the beloved smell as it is and not pollute the air with more smoke," Winnie snapped. Amanda walked through the door, heard her sister's harsh tone, and asked, "What's going on?" "Harmony wants to smudge," Bea told her. "Excellent," Amanda declared. "I didn't know that," Bea said. "Cool." Realizing she'd lost the anti-smudging campaign, Winnie turned around and walked back up the stairs. She couldn't quite make out the conversation between Bea, Amanda, and Harmony, but she found Letty's tea and brewed a cup for Beatrice. She knew if she was going to be polite, if she was being the kind of person Letty would have wanted her to be, she would have offered a cup to Harmony. She wasn't feeling that generous. She carried the mug down to Beatrice and handed it to her. "Thank you," Bea murmured. "Harmony was telling us there was a fire inspector going through all of the shops," Amanda said. Winnie nodded. She didn't want to tell the others about the bad feeling she'd had about the man in front of Harmony. "Did we pass the inspection?" Amanda asked, unwilling to drop the subject. "We have some code violations," Winnie admitted, "and apparently this place is a fire trap because the back door is bolted shut."
"Hank could take care of that for you," Harmony suggested.
The Concordia sisters all focused on her.
"Who's Hank?" Amanda asked.
Winnie had the feeling she already knew, thinking that was the name she'd heard Piper call the grizzled old man in Perk Up.
"He's the neighborhood handyman," Harmony explained. "If you need something fixed, or painted, or moved, Hank is your man."
"I'm sure Ash could do it for us," Bea said.
Harmony shrugged. "I'm sure he could, but Hank could use the work."
"Well," Winnie said, "if Ash could do it for free." Harmony shook her head.
"Trust me, it will be good karma if you hire Hank. You won't even have to pay him in cash. Just pay him in something in here." She waved her hands to encompass the shop.
"Oh, no," Winnie said. "We're not going to be responsible for another homeless person." "Edwina Lily Concordia," Amanda said, standing up straight and sounding an awful lot like Letty had when she'd been outraged. "You know better than to treat people like that." "Letty raised us to be better than that," Bea added softly. "I wasn't saying don't help the homeless," Winnie said, shaking her head. "All I'm saying is that we've already taken responsibility for Rena." She shrugged helplessly. "We can barely take care of ourselves. We've got the dog, we've got Rena." She trailed off, realizing this was another argument she wasn't going to win. And truthfully, she didn't want to. She didn't want to be the kind of person who wasn't willing to help somebody else who was down on their luck. She sighed. "How do we find Hank?"
"Not to worry," Harmony said with a big smile. "I'll send him over to talk to you."
She handed Amanda the giant bunch of sage, formed a heart with her hands, and offered it to each of the sisters, then strolled out of the store whistling off-key. "How did your appointment go?" Winnie asked Amanda, not wanting to launch into another conversation about the fire and
Sample complete. Ready to continue?